Immigrants. So during the late 19th century, we have this period of basically unprecedented worldwide population movements. Specifically, we're going to be looking at like 1870 through 1910. The United States is going to receive more than 20 million immigrants. So we have a lot of people coming in. So where are they all coming from and why? And I want you to think about themes and what repeats here multiple times. So we're going to see a lot of people from Southern and Eastern Europe come to the United States during this time period. A lot of these people had originally migrated probably across Europe on a seasonal basis, finding work where they could. But basically now we get factors driving them out of Europe. You have in Europe basically a growing rural population combined with just unequal land distribution. And so you have a lot of economic distress. There's just not enough land to go around for everyone. Land ownership was in the concentrated hands of even fewer people. People are working smaller and smaller plots. A lot of times they're working as laborers rather than outright owners of land. And this just means more and more people falling into greater poverty. And so this pushes a lot of these people from Eastern and Southern Europe out of Europe entirely to the States. We also get a lot of Russian Jewish population coming to the United States at this time. The thing is, in 1881, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, and it was blamed on Jewish people in Russia. And so they're going to face a lot of religious persecution as well as economic hardship, such as you get all these like series of violent attacks on Jewish settlements in Russia. The government would force Jewish people to live in fewer and fewer towns and smaller towns, which deepens their poverty because it's going to limit their economic opportunity. But also you have to keep in mind it makes them an easier target for violence against them. And so millions of Russian Jews are going to actually sail on ocean liners over to the United States. We also get like the Chinese, so you can see on this map, people aren't just coming across the Atlantic, people are coming across the Pacific too. A lot of Chinese immigrants that come to America during this time came from Canton specifically. This is a region of South China and a region of great rural poverty. They're going to go on to work for like railroads and the mines throughout the West. A lot of them were initially farmers in California, but a lot of times they're going to be replaced by Japanese immigrants instead. And a lot of times Chinese immigrants, when they would up and move into cities in America, they're going to establish actually their own residential enclaves that come to be known as Chinatowns. So the Japanese immigrants that are coming to America at this time, they're driven also by a land shortage that's actually even worse than that of Europe. A lot of times, like I said, they'd take the place of Chinese workers on farms. Nearly all the Japanese immigrants that come to the States stay on that West Coast. And that's going to be a really important later when we get to World War II, actually. And then lastly, we have another big group that comes in at this time is from the South. I say Mexicans here, but really you could say all South Americans, Latin Americans. You have a lot of people coming in from different areas. A lot of times they're going to initially work on like ranches and cotton farms in the South and settle predominantly in rural areas. But once again, over time, you see them moving more and more often to cities. Now, the thing is, when you're looking at all of these groups, really immigrants of this time period and immigrants to today, to a certain extent, see the route as a two-way highway. There was this intention to come to America, stay for a couple of years at most, earn enough money to buy land or establish a business back in their home country, and then return home and thus improve their life for them and their families back at home. And that's actually what happens for about half the immigrants that come to the United States between 1880 and World War I. They do return to their country of origin. Now, there is one exception to this. That would be the Russian Jewish population. Not more than 10% ever returned to Europe, partly because they were escaping religious persecution as much as they were also escaping economic hardships. The other thing you see about a lot of these immigrants that are coming here during this time period initially are going to be predominantly young men. They are going to find work in the cities. A lot of times they would go to get this money by working in large urban factories that had this demand for unskilled labor. It's very few immigrants that come to the United States to work on farms after like 1880. But by 1900, we start seeing more and more women immigrants coming over, and a lot of times it's women coming to join their husbands and such. Men would send for their families. In the few cases, you get like entire villages moving, such as like chain migration. Once again, the exception to all this is from the very beginning, Russian Jewish populations tended to be actually more likely families because, once again, entire families trying to escape religious persecution. The thing is, immigrants, when they came to the United States, tended to live in neighborhoods amongst people of their same homeland. There's an element of you want something to be familiar. If you ever decide to go study abroad, and I can say this as I did study abroad for my master's degree in England, come Thanksgiving, you wanted to find all the other Americans so that you could celebrate that holiday with the other Americans. It didn't matter where they were from in America, very much, oh, they're another American. And so there's this element of you want to find people of your own background. Totally understandable. And so we're going to see this happens with immigrants that move to the United States at this time. That being said, their native culture is going to shape their response to being in America. There's this huge conflicting desire for immigrants. On one hand, they want to retain their own cultural traditions, but they also understood that they needed to assimilate into American society to be accepted and have the same kind of economic opportunities as native-born Americans. So I ask you this question, and you might want to pause this in 2 seconds to answer it, or you can go ahead and finish the video and then come back to it. What themes do you notice for immigrants coming to the United States? So what things do you see repeating for multiple groups? So when immigrants came to America, a lot of times their focus is actually going to be on their religious institutions, because through their religious institutions, they could maintain their cultural traditions of their home country, and thus the church in that way becomes this like focal point of immigrant neighborhood life. But also the church in a way becomes their school for transmitting. On one hand, they want to keep their old world values and language, but also it's a teaching facility to learn about the nation they are now in, the United States. And so it's a recreational facility, but also a gathering place. You do see some groups, religion plays less of a formal role, and instead family becomes their source of, keeping their old traditions, but also learning new American traditions as well. You also get, for all immigrants, they have things like ethnic newspapers, theaters, and schools. And so you have, once again, these two conflicting ideas of, on one hand, they want to reinforce their old world culture, but they also want to inform themselves of American ways.